Welcome to Mental Health Monday Recovery 11, and today I'm going to be talking about self-harm. Like I said, you cannot really see on this because it's just my webcam and iMovie, so the quality is not excellent. But I have significant scarring on both arms, which causes physical self-harm. There are many different types of self-harm. There's an argument for self-harm in an awful lot of things once you are aware of what you're doing. Let's just say if you're doing something as a means to damage yourself, then it's self-harm. But what I'm going to talk about today is the form of self-harm that is associated with cutting oneself or burning oneself, anything like that, anything that attacks the skin in order to damage or purge by damage, or to attack because of hatred or whatever, or because of pain. There are many different reasons behind self-harm. It is a very complex and personal outlet, and it is an outlet. It is not the correct outlet, it is not a healthy outlet, but it is an outlet. Now, I considered self-harm from very early on. In my early teens, I had a self-harm kit hidden at the back of my wardrobe, and I was intending to use them. I took them out many times and considered using them. Now, let me just make it clear. Self-harm is something that escalates. It does not start off seriously in most cases. As it becomes part of your routine, as it becomes part of what you do to cope, it gets worse. It is an escalatory problem. I am very fortunate in that mine did not get to that point, but I will come to that in a minute. Let's start off with in my teens. I was going to self-harm. I had every intention of doing so because I did not want to kill myself. There are reasons around that, as I mentioned in my early Mental Health Monday videos, that I do not wish to talk about. I'm not going to talk about them. They are personal. But I wanted to self-harm. I felt I needed a release because I wasn't being listened to. I wasn't being heard. I was trapped inside myself, and I just needed some kind of outlet. I had no voice, essentially, so I needed an outlet, and that's what I wanted to do. But I'm a bit of a Vulcan. Well, I have been anyway, a bit of a Vulcan. Very logical, highly logical, and highly unemotional. I don't let emotions get in the way of my decisions most of the time. When I do, things go disastrously wrong. Let's just say my emotions are not my most sensible part. But when I was a teenager and I was considering this, I remember one day watching a documentary on a woman who had started off self-harming as a means to get out stuff that was stuck inside, to cope with it, and had started on a very small scale and had been afraid of the pain, but gradually it escalated so much that literally her whole arm was just a red dent. And watching that, seeing the physical evidence of the damage she'd done to herself, it hit me right in my logic cortex, and I was like, oh yeah, I could feel in myself very clearly the possibility, the probability of severe escalation on that scale. Because I had so much locked away, I knew that if I started, it would not stop, so I just didn't. There are going to be people that are like, oh, you didn't self-harm, it can't have been that bad. I'm sorry, whether you self-harm or not is not an indication of how bad things are. Let's just get that right out of the way straight away. Self-harming or not is not an indication of how bad things are inside your head or inside your heart or inside your body. Okay? It's not. It is a bad coping mechanism that people get into. Okay? Sometimes the idea occurs to you out of nowhere. It certainly occurred to me out of nowhere. Ooh, I could cut myself. Don't even know where that idea came from, but it came. And I had that kit. Then I saw the documentary and it stopped me dead in my tracks, and I'm very pleased that it did. But it does not indicate your levels of pain or your ability to cope with them, okay? Everybody has different coping mechanisms. And sometimes when you look like your coping mechanisms are all fine and all dandy, they're not. under the surface, you are a wreck and a ruin. So I just want to make that perfectly clear. When it comes to mental illness, the mask that you wear is not an indication of what is going on beneath the surface. So whether your mask has cuts in it or not does not indicate how well or how badly you are coping. Okay? Fast forward to my late 20s, where, again, not going to go into a lot of things, but life was very, very difficult. There were family problems, considerable ones, and in my wider family, as well as my little family unit of my partner and my children. And my bipolar started to spiral out of my control properly for the first time in a long time. I mean, I did not know at that point it was bipolar, but it started to become the way it had in my teens, where I had no grounding. I mean, I had not been grounded, but I had grounding. I had like a toe on the ground. You know, like the rest of you is floating, but the toe is grounded. I had one toe hold on the ground, one toe hold on reality. And in my late 20s, it started to slip. My ability to cope with everything that I had held on to so hard, despite so much interior warfare, started to slip. I could not cope with anything, and I was in a real state inside and outside. I'd never been brilliant at coping. Like I say, one toe hold on the ground, that's all it was, and that is really not enough to be going on with. It was enough for me to be going on with because it was better than I'd had before, but it was an interim coping mechanism. It was not strong enough to work for long. I don't know how I managed to keep it up for as long as I did, because it shouldn't have held for that long, but it did. And in my late 20s, like I said, it started to disintegrate, and yeah, things were not good, and I was not getting support again. At that point, I had joined a mental health forum, and I kind of knew that if I didn't go and ask for help, I wasn't going to get any, and that I needed help desperately. My control, my connection to groundedness was disintegrating so thoroughly that I felt like I was losing the ability to even be partially a good mother. I knew I needed help at that point, and I went to get help, and I was flatly turned down. The first doctor I went to flatly refused me help because there was no indication of mental illness on the outside of my body. So the first time I cut myself was to prove that I needed help. The very first time I cut myself was because I was so fucking desperate for help that I felt like I needed to damage my skin to be legitimized. Now I look back on it, I am like, what the fuck was she thinking? Saying to me that because there was no outward sign of my mental deterioration, that I couldn't have any help. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. Just so unprofessional. Anyway, leaving that behind, her idea of being helpful at that point was to put me on Prozac. Now, anybody who knows bipolar disorder knows that you do not put someone with bipolar on an SSRI. They do not work. What they do when you give someone with bipolar an SSRI, it sends them loopy. I was thrown into the longest artificial mania ever. The entire time I was taking Prozac, I was in a mania, and part of that mania was cutting. During the time that I was on Prozac, I couldn't stop. I had to wear arm warmers all the time because I couldn't stop cutting. Some of them were quite deep, some of them, you know, several millimeters deep, but it didn't get a chance to escalate to the level of cutting deeper into subcutaneous fat and whatever, because I found the right help. The mental health forum that I was on, there was someone on there who knew about advocacy, and they got me in contact with the advocacy service, who then referred me to the advocates in my local area, who then accompanied me to my appointments and made sure that I got the help that I needed. Part of which was getting me a proper evaluation by a psychiatrist, who took me off the Prozac and put me on my Depakote and my lefepramine and the antipsychotic that I was on. And the effect of coming off Prozac was immediate when it came to the cutting. I stopped and I did not cut again, and I have not cut since. Now, I want to be absolutely clear that cutting was never a good coping mechanism. It is not a good coping mechanism. It is damage that you can't get rid of. These scars, the only way I can ever get rid of them now is to tattoo over them, and believe me, I intend to, because the first thing people see when they see your scars, they look at your scars and they feel kind of, I don't know, some kind of discomfort that they're around someone who's not stable. And it's like, yeah, at one point in my life I wasn't stable. I'm not ashamed of that. Why should I be? I went through a hell of a lot. I am not in that place anymore. You know, there are parts of me that will always retain the damage that was done. I can't do anything about those, and I can't do anything about the scars, but they weren't something I wanted. And I think that's the same for everyone who self-harms. You start off as a means to cope, but it's not something you want. And what you end up with, the evidence of your coping carved into your skin, it's not a good thing. You look at it and it reminds you of pain. It reminds you of hurt. It reminds you of damage. It reminds you of the time when you felt most vulnerable and most broken. All it does is take you back to the person that you didn't want to be and that you're glad you're not anymore. It's not a good reminder. It's not a good thing to have on your skin. I would definitely 100% urge anyone who is cutting already to try and find help to stop, because when you eventually get round to stopping and they heal, they're not going to be a thing that you feel good about. I'm not ashamed of them, understand? But I don't feel good about them. Not liking that they're there is a very different thing to shame, okay? I'm not ashamed of how I coped at that point. Not even though it was just Prozac. I don't believe it was just Prozac. What a mania does is bring out stuff that you're containing. This is later in the day, as you can tell by the light and by the kitty. Yeah, I went on a bit of a parenthetical rant, like an aside, a tangent as it were, but I've left it in. I'm leaving it in because I thought it was interesting. It's not that long, but I feel it's pertinent, so just to let you know, a bit of a tangent coming up. Why is it the medical profession, when you're genuinely ill, treats you as though you actually want to be ill? I don't know anyone with a mental illness that actually wants it. It's part of that fucking stigma where you get treated like you're actively just trying to be ill. Even by the professionals who have gone through X amount of training and read X amount of medical journals, which talk in depth about mental illness and how it works and how it is. I mean, surely they can't be that fucking ignorant that they would think that you would want to be ill. But I don't know, maybe it's part of this whole thing that I get just because I look a little bit different. People just assume you're fucking, I don't know, stupid or something. It's like, yeah, I dye my hair blue because I'm fucking remedial. Fuck off. Seriously. Anyway, I'm digressing. It's not something that you should do. Self-harm of any kind, you should try and avoid it. And I'm not preaching. I'm just saying, as one person who's been there and done it, and I've seen many other people who've self-harmed say exactly the same thing, and a lot of them, most of them in fact, self-harm far worse than me and didn't have the help of a drug that was entirely wrong for them. Don't do it. They say don't do it. They don't want to have done it. If you could go back, you would erase that moment. You would erase it, because what's left is not a good reminder. It's not something you feel good about. Like I said, it's not something you feel ashamed about, but it's not something you feel good about. It is never a good decision to take out inner pain on your flesh. Never. There are other ways. There is other help. and I would urge you to take it. If you are thinking about self-harm, or if you're already in a pattern of self-harming, I would urge you to find a better way to help yourself. And that's all I really have to say about it, which is more than enough because I've been going on for 25 minutes. Next time on Mental Health Monday Recovery, I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about. I've got quite a few things that I want to talk about, but it occurred to me that one thing I desperately need to talk about kind of has a relevance on the other videos that I do, the reviews, and that is memory issues. Like I talked about in the PTSD video, things have a physical effect on your brain. They actively shrink your hippocampus and amygdala, so you have a physically reduced capacity to recall things, to make memories. And I want to talk about that because I feel like my memory is getting worse all the time. Can't remember simple things. I blank out on words all the time. Not just a little bit, not just as a consequence of age. I mean, I'm not that old anyway. I'm only 39. I'm a baby in a lot of sense. I'm not even middle-aged yet. But my memory is absolutely abominable. It's dire. And there is a very significant reason for that. And I want to talk about that next week. And I want to talk about coping with it and the frustration it engenders. Yeah, I just want to talk about the whole subject really, and I'll probably waffle on about that as long as I've waffled on about self-harm. So, sorry this week is so long, because I'm probably not going to edit most of this out because I feel like a lot of it is important. And I apologise in advance for how long the next Mental Health Monday in 2 weeks is likely to be. If you managed to stick with me for this entire video, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Mental Health Monday to talk about memory problems.